Okay.
Earlier this week, we had a wonderful discussion on a minimal set of practices for an ITP. Would you both care to speculate on what a minimum set of practices are for an IBP or for an integral business, perhaps?
Your multiple bottom lines.
And I want to add one more thing is, as Fred's programs and Ken's programs take off, and Sounds True grows to be 1,000 people, how are you going to sustain this beautiful environment you created?
We're going to go on a lot of executive retreats with Fred, and he's going to train all the managers at Sounds True. Well, the answer to your other question, which was financial transparency, I think has to be included. And whether or not a company chooses an ESOP plan, I think with the financial transparency, there needs to be some profit-sharing system so that everybody's built into and educated on the financial success. This idea of bringing the contemplative dimension in, I mentioned the 1 minute of silence, but there's a couple other things that we do at Sounds True, and not to go into too much detail, but I think that that's also a really important component. And maybe many of you have heard of Peter Block, but he's somebody who influenced me a lot and somebody that we did some recording with at Sounds True. And one of the examples he gave to me is, have you ever noticed, Tami, that you go on a 2-week vacation, there you are on the beach in Hawaii, you're all relaxed, you've been doing your practices ad nauseum, et cetera, stretching. You come back and you're totally burned out within 1 day. Like, what happened? You were gone, and literally, maybe it's the second or third day you're back, you need another vacation. It's like, what's actually going on in business that does that to you? And his theory was that we just don't build reflection into business, and that humans need reflection. You can't just keep going at a certain type of clip without having that opportunity to relax, breathe, reflect, talk about how you're feeling, make meaning out of your experience. And so at Sounds True, we've built in time for reflection. And even to the point where you can say in a meeting, how are you feeling about this meeting? Like, that's an appropriate aspect to a meeting. Because the point is not to get so burned out that you have to keep going on vacations, but to actually create a sustainable work week and workflow. And there's lots of ways to create reflection in a business. Another thing that Sounds True is we have a really active kitchen. At one point, we were working with this New York consultant, and he said, Tami, you should either be running a kennel club or a culinary club. But nobody around here is like moving. They're all petting the dogs and cooking. What's going on around here? And I was like, we fired this consultant soon after this. After we got as much of his information about our cost of goods and other issues we were struggling with. But he just couldn't believe that somebody was actually taking the time to cook lunch, like from scratch, like to cut carrots. He's like, listen, in New York, you order, it gets delivered, you go to a place, you have 30. He's like, what do you mean that there's like 3 people cooking? And I was like, isn't that nice? Maybe sit down, and they'll actually offer you some of their extra stir fry if you could just calm down for a moment. So anyway, there's simple ways to build reflection into a company that aren't huge spiritual initiatives. It's actually have a stove. When we built our building, our architect said, well, here's the microwave, and da-da-da. And I said, where's the stove? And he said, Tami, they don't have stoves in businesses. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, microwaved food is what if you want to like properly bake a potato? You don't want to put it in the microwave, do you? And he was like, well, businesses don't have stoves. Like, you're the first, customer I've ever had who actually wanted to put a real stove in their kitchen. Anyway.
If a dog is 3 poops and it's out, what's the chef?
The chefs get to stay.
Okay.
The chefs are invited. So the first thing is financial transparency. The second is build this contemplative dimension into your workplace. Whatever is real for you and your company. And don't get hung up on this is religion in the workplace. Don't go there. Just be creative. We allowed, I had nothing to do with this, but we had extra warehouse space, it sounds true. And a bunch of employees said, can we create a gym back here? And I was like, well, how much is this going to cost me? And they're like, oh, come on, why are you such a fuddy-duddy? It looks like you could work out too. And not in so many words. And I was like, well, it's not in the budget. What are you talking about? And they said, well, why don't we take the money that we're spending on massage, because we did have a benefit that was massage that some people liked and some people didn't, and why don't we put that into the gym? And I was like, well, that's a great idea. These people really did receive their financial education. They're talking my language. So, $4,000 or $5,000 a year is now gone into our gym. It actually gets used tremendously by people. And in fact, a lot of different employees have volunteered to teach classes in the morning and the evening, yoga classes, stretching classes, Nia classes, drumming classes, whatever. But the curious thing is that I asked a couple months ago, the gym's only been in existence for about 9 months, how many people had used it. And up until that point, myself and one other person were the only 2 people who hadn't used the gym, which was, I thought, another embarrassing moment. So I guess my point about the second principle is do it your own way, but create an opportunity for people to stop working and integrate, reflect, and be contemplative. And then I'd say probably this should be the first one, not the third, but if you're going to have an integral business, it's going to have to be doing something in the world that matters. Like, I just don't know if all the other stuff can line up if that's not there. It certainly wouldn't line up for me. What are we doing that actually is improving the world? Because to me, that's the point of being around, and then the point of being alive, the point of, how can you create this whole sort of for the sake of the whole environment if what you're actually doing isn't for the sake of the whole world? So I would probably start there. I think if you had those 3 things, you'd be a long way towards it.
You'll notice that if you take her four bottom lines counting oxygen, if you do that, and then you count what she just said, that was I, we, and it across the levels. That literally is an integrally informed prescription. I totally second the notion of making it individual, but you can see that she's really covering the bases in doing that, which is very, very interesting. Notice how much time, I'll talk about you in third person thing. The first thing she said when she was talking about how to do this is she takes the role of other. Remember, quadrants are perspectives that sentient beings can take. And that's the primary thing that she said when she was talking about interacting. And that's exactly what is one of the great, great gifts of second and third tiers, that perspectives start to become transparent. So that's one of the driving things of sort of everything that Tami has said. And then her bottom lines were variations on, if you all are familiar with, again, if you use spiral dynamics, that what you're looking for, if you talk about blue, orange, green, and yellow, is principle, profit, person, and planet. So you're taking these purposes into account. Notice also what she did, though. She spent a lot of time talking about physical space, the lower right quadrant. The actual architecture in which human beings live has an enormous influence on every single thing else that occurs. And that's what's so astonishing. A lot of people sort of think, well, the lower right, the space or that kind of thing is kind of an afterthought. I can do whatever I'm doing, and that's sort of an afterthought. It's almost never an afterthought. It's the fundamental organization that sets your consciousness in an almost daily basis. So much so that very, very profound thinkers like Karl Marx could look at just the lower right quadrant and damn near get away with deriving entire sociology out of it. Doesn't quite work, but it's that strong. So whether you're putting a stove in, or a gym in, or a place to meditate, or just how you actually set up cubicles or rooms or interactive space for people, that impinges on your consciousness 24 hours a day that you're in that space, whether you're thinking about it or not. And it's an enormous, enormous influence. So that really has to be important. I don't think it's an accident if you look at the great meditative, contemplative traditions. And you would think, well, if they're spending all the time meditating, they ought to live in places that look more or less like a crack den. It's like, who cares about that? It's the most aesthetic environment you can find is in a monastery, a contemplative place. Go and look at a Zen rock garden, and you've never seen a more precise aesthetic placement. So that's the power of place. That's the power of that. And then having a purpose in the world, of course, is exactly the overall drive of that. So I would agree with everything she said, and just point out that that really is touching all the bases of quadrants and levels. It's really exquisite.